Okay, so welcome everyone to the session for the Oxford MSc Major Program Management at the University of Oxford. My name is Sara Nema. I am the Recruitment Manager for the program, and today I'm joined by the Program Director, Guy Ainsley, who will be discussing current themes within Major Program Management, followed by Q&A. During the taster lecture, please post your questions using the Q&A function. We will answer them after the lecture. But before that, I will kick off with some key and quick facts on this MSc. The MSc in Major Program Management is fully accredited and awarded by the University of Oxford. We have designed it to be in a deliberately accessible format by making it part-time over 2 years, so that students can remain in work and apply lessons learned in practice. In terms of design, it's structured around 8 modules of 4 to 5 days each at Oxford or online, plus 2 days getaway. In between modules, there are pre and post readings and assignments. Also, there is a dissertation at the end. This year's intake will start on Monday, 6th of September, and the fee is just under £47,000. This fee includes matriculation, tuition, college membership, and most learning resources. This master's consists of 8 core and mandatory modules. These are structured around 3 fundamental themes: programs as organizations, stakeholder engagement, and risk management. The dates on the screen are for the September 2021 intake. Of course, having the schedule in advance can allow you to organize your work and personal commitments. The program is designed through academic and industry collaboration and aims to improve program management outcomes globally. This MSc is formally assessed by 8 individual assignments of 3,000 words each and a written dissertation of 10,000 words. Students have about 6 to 7 months for their dissertation. And in terms of time commitment, we give a rough guideline of 10 hours study time per week for the duration of the degree. And also worth mentioning that there are no exams, so 8 individual assignments and a dissertation. The last intake started with 59 students, and the rest of the numbers on the screen here is what we typically have on the cohorts of this MSc. For example, the average age is about 41, and students have an average of 16 to 17 years of work experience. You can see that participants are senior, knowledgeable practitioners who come from a rich mix of industries, experiences, and backgrounds. Many of you might be thinking about the delivery plans for the program given the current global situation and travel restrictions. It is intended that the MSc Major Program Management will be taught initially in a hybrid delivery model that will enable you to join classes either in person or online, with the expectation and understanding that the program may need to be adapted to comply with UK government or university policy. We will offer this form of hybrid teaching for as long as this might be necessary for participants with, of course, global health considerations and travel restrictions in mind. In due course, we would hope and expect all participants to come to Oxford for their classes. Okay, now I will hand you over to the Program Director, Dr. Guy Ainsley. As I said, if you have any questions, then please post them in the Q&A function, and we will address as many as we can towards the end. Guy, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. Just going to share my screen. Who can share it? Yep. Okay, hopefully you can all see that now. Yeah. Okay, so this afternoon we're going to talk about what's commonly called strategic misrepresentation. And we're going to take a bit of a sideways critical view of the topic. So the topic crops up lots of times over. Every time you sort of touch the literature relating to major programs and projects, you'll find somewhere in it the idea of strategic misrepresentation. So that's our sort of topic for today. So what is it? Well, broadly, it's presenting projects for approval knowingly having understated the costs and or overstated the benefits. So this is where the idea being is that people structure a project's presentation in a way that gives it the maximum chance of being accepted by the stakeholders. So they will talk about benefits that don't necessarily exist or are hard to quantify, or then increase the value of those benefits using multipliers, etc. And they'll understate the costs, even though they know those costs are unlikely to be deliverable. So it's knowingly doing something. Now, strategic misrepresentation is deliberate. It's not the same as optimism bias. Optimism bias is where we kind of make subjective judgments that we do it in an optimistic way. So optimism bias is not the same as strategic misrepresentation. And it's not the same as errors and omissions, because they happen very often, either through poor design of spreadsheets, poor calculation of costs, etc., miscalculations. So strategic misrepresentation is very much a deliberate act. It's knowingly understating the cost or overstating the benefits. So we're going to use something which is interestingly easily available. So in the UK, the way we control some of our government is through select committees, so common select committees, and there's a whole set of these committees, and the one we're interested in is the Transport Committee. So what's the purpose of the Transport Committee? Well, its remit is to scrutinise the Department of Transport. Now, they're the budget holder and they're responsible for delivery of a very broad range of major programmes and projects in the UK, largely relating to transport infrastructure. That's probably the sort of broadest, most obvious remit they've got. They've got a lot of other things they do as well, but in this context, we're talking about the construction of major programmes and projects, railways, motorways, etc. The Transport Committee also holds ministers and departments to account. So it's their purpose to make sure that what is said by the Department of Transport in terms of justification for major programmes, there's oversight of it before it's too late. And the final point there is to investigate matters of public concern, particularly talking about accountability, so largely financial accountability. So if obviously the budgets are huge, therefore it's important that somebody has oversight of the account, is held to account through oversight of some sort. So that's the remit of this committee. So we've got a fantastic source, because the beauty of these committees, there was one on one yesterday that made the headlines on all the newspapers, but the beauty of them is they publish minutes, and because they publish minutes, you're able to actually read and see. They're also televised, but read and see, and then look at the content of what they are arguing either way. So you get a tremendous amount of detail. And on the 17th of March this year, there was oral evidence given to major transport infrastructure projects. So what happened is they all gathered in a committee, and they gave evidence which was then transcribed and also televised. And this is the source we're going to use for this discussion today. This is our material. So this was the chairman's opening statement. So it's a committee, so they have a chairperson, and this was the chairperson's opening statement. This is the Transport Select Committee's opening evidence session for our inquiry into major transport infrastructure projects. And then the chairperson went on to give it some scale. In the 2020 budget, the government committed £640 billion towards investment projects that were designed to drive growth and level up economic opportunity. And transport accounts for 57% of all infrastructure spends. So roughly you're looking at a number of something in excess of 400 billion, so it's like 400 billion pounds of existing committed expenditure. That's not all in 1 year, obviously, but that stretches out for, in some cases, for decades to come. But the number is very, very big. So what they're trying to do is trying to decide what is the value, what are taxpayers getting for that, what's the impact. But they've given us two indicators as to what they're going to be measuring it against. So the first is to drive growth. This is what the chairperson said. And in this context, driving growth can only really mean economic growth. So you're looking for a multiplier, i.e. you get more out than you put in. So quite a blunt instrument in many respects, because that can be managed on a local, measured on a local level or nationally. You can calculate the value of growth quite easily. There's some debate about around the edges, but we understand how we can measure economic growth. The next thing was level up economic opportunity. And that we interpret as meaning to provide the same opportunities for all parts of the UK that are available in London and the South East. And I'll show you a map in a minute as to why that's relevant. But there's a large debate 2 or 3 years ago, or two years ago, during an election, and one of the big statements made by the political party which won the election, was they intended to level up the economy. And that means that parts away from the southeast and away from London are given the same opportunities, because for decades, actually for longer than that, actually strangely enough, for centuries, investment has tended to gravitate towards London and the southeast. And that's a common phenomenon in many countries. Over time, you get these areas, these sort of pockets of economic development, and they attract more and more resources. And because they attract more resources, people want to invest privately in them as well as publicly. So the statement was made, two things: we're going to drive growth and we're going to level up economic opportunity. The first one, fairly easy to measure. The second one, a lot harder to measure, and a lot harder to measure in a short period of time. So just a bit of background. So there's a very large infrastructure project underway in the UK at the moment, and it's called High Speed 2, or HS2. And I've drawn a bit of a rough map there of what it is. So if we take that to be the UK, the blue bits, HS2 phase 1 starts in London, which is the purple bit, and it heads off towards Birmingham. And the project's been underway for a few years now, and on I think Monday last week or a fortnight ago, they started a very large tunnel being bored under some hills just to the west of London. So this thing is really happening. And the estimates for this expenditure for this railway are roughly £100 billion. So it's supposedly currently the largest single infrastructure project anywhere under construction in the world today, the largest single project. And then from that, there's two sort of yellow arrows, yellow lines, which point up. One goes towards the northwest, one goes towards the northeast. And that's HS2 phase 2, which is intended for completion 2035 to 2040. And I've circled a red bit, and broadly, that's the affluent bit of the UK. I say broadly, there are pockets of deprivation within that area, but broadly, that area of the UK is regarded as being significantly more affluent, with more opportunities than the bits outside it. And in general, the further north you go, the further away from London, the more levelling up is required. So that's a bit of background as to what we're actually talking about. This is one of the major projects at HS2. So I'm going to get back now to 1990, and in order for HS2 to work properly, it needs a couple of bits of sort of connecting infrastructure. And the intention was to be able to build out a high-speed network of railways out from London, one of which goes south towards the Channel Tunnel, and the rest of it, as I showed you earlier, just goes north. So we've got a bit of a track record in the UK of doing this, not a great track record in comparison to most other European countries. Certainly Spain, Italy, France have got a much greater track record of high-speed rail, but we, we do have one. And I'm just going to talk about a couple of projects major projects that to some extent can give us an idea of as to where we might be. So in 1994, the Channel Tunnel opened. And the Channel Tunnel, obviously, as its name suggests, goes underneath the channel, linking France to the UK. And the tunnel took a number of years to build, and I won't go into the history of it, but it opened in 1994. And from that date, it started to struggle financially. Now, main reason it was struggling financially was because of a large amount of debt that was built up into it prior to it opening. And that debt was just too great. So basically, as I've indicated there, 95, 97, 2006 and 2007, the Channel Tunnel required a major financial restructuring or financial rescue. So that's the high-speed link to France that was open. And then there was another one added in 1997, which took it out to Belgium. So you can jump on a train in London and you could go fairly slowly from London to the Channel, and then once you're in France, high-speed rail took you to Paris. In 1996, the UK government passed legislation enabling what's called High Speed 1, which is a high-speed railway linking London to the Channel Tunnel. The idea being you could jump on a train in London and go at high speed all the way out of the UK into Europe and vice versa. So construction started in 96 and carried on in the first section of it, and then the second section started around the same time and finished in 2007, 2008. And as you can see, guess what? A set of financial rescues and restructuring events happened as well, this time during the construction of the railway. So this didn't happen afterwards, it happened during the construction. And today, High Speed 1 is now owned by non-UK investors. It's been bought and sold by those investors a couple of times. So I think now it currently belongs to a South Korean pension fund. And I think before that it was a Canadian pension fund that owned it. And it is a fantastic thing. If you ever come to the UK and you want to go on a railway adventure, I can thoroughly recommend it. It is genuinely beautiful to get on a train in London in a fantastic station, go at high speed, smooth as anything through southeast England, out into the Channel Tunnel, and then appear in France and on your way to Paris or wherever. It's a fantastic experience unless you happen to be an early shareholder or an investor in that, in which case you got burned several times over. And ultimately, or even though it's now pre-COVID, both bits of infrastructure, the Channel Tunnel and High Speed 2, were viable businesses that were making profits. They still cost the original shareholders a huge amount of money. So we then get to High Speed 2 at the very bottom, and that began construction, I say, really in earnest this year, but lots of preparation work was done before. And that's intended to last for 15, 20 years, depending upon which phase you're looking at. So I'm not saying that that High Speed 2's financial performance is going to be the same as Channel Tunnel and High Speed 1. But we do have a poor track record in this instance of being able to do this and do it viably. So this is kind of ripe territory. This is the sort of territory where strategic misrepresentation can become a real temptation. If you want to build HS2 and you look at the history of HS1 and the Channel Tunnel and lots of other high-speed rail infrastructure projects, you're going to do two things, or potentially do two things: decrease the estimate of costs and increase the estimate of benefits. Strategic misrepresentation. But we're going to question that. So this is our sort of understanding. So who's on our committee? Well, these people met, as I say, back in March, and these are the witnesses, and they're very well qualified people. So as you can see, fellow of the Institute of Civil Engineers, Chief Executive Officer of the National Infrastructure Commission, Commissioner of the National Infrastructure Commission, the former Chancellor, Philip Hammond, and Tony Meggs, who's the ex-chairman of Crossrail, which is the railway that spans London, and Chief Executive of the Infrastructure and Projects Authority. So these are people who know what they're talking about from an engineering point of view, from infrastructure, and in Philip Hammond's case, Lord Hammond there, he was the former Chancellor, so he understands about the budgeting side of it. So what did they say then? So, okay, so the process is that somebody, in this case a man called Robert Largan, who's a member of the committee, asks a question and frames it with the fit for purpose about levelling up, etc., and rebalancing the economy. And then one of the witnesses, James Heath, says, the bit I've highlighted, at a high level, the current appraisal process has perhaps over-relied on cost-benefit ratios for projects at the exclusion of developing a robust evidence-based strategic case. Now, I'm a taxpayer in the UK, and I'm sitting here thinking, well, is that really the case? £640 billion of mine and everybody else's money committed to it, and are we really saying we haven't got a really robust way of doing it? Not so sure that gives me a lot of comfort. He then went on to say, it's probably better to start with the policy objectives. What are you trying to achieve? And then look at the extent to which different projects will deliver it. Yeah, okay, I can kind of get that. If your policy objective is to level up, well, that's a very big and broad task. So how can we achieve that? Big projects, small projects, combinations of them. So yeah, I can kind of get that. That sort of makes sense. That should probably lead to closer alignment between your appraisal and your outcomes. Yeah, if economic growth is the objective, you can stimulate the economy short term, you can do lots of things, and you can measure it. But levelling up, quite hard to do, difficult one. They then went on to talk about this. So Robert Largan, who's on the committee, said, for my sins, I briefly spent a period of time as a policy advisor, and I've sat in rooms with civil servants talking about infrastructure projects. And I will not say which one. The BCR on this does not really stack up, but it benefits the Chief Secretary to the Treasury's constituency. So we will find a way to bolster the BCR, so the benefit cost ratio. So basically strategic misrepresentation, which the Chief Secretary, I won't say which Chief Secretary to the Treasury, there is definitely an element of that. So what that committee member is saying is quite clearly stating that he has heard people openly admit to planning to and be amenable to changing the benefit cost ratio, so upping the benefits, downing the costs in order to get a particular project underway. And then one of the witnesses said, look, may I intervene? So what is this witness saying? So there's lots of literature, so academic literature, about so-called strategic misrepresentation. People are optimistic at the beginning of projects in order to get their project approved. So doing what Robert Largan, the committee member, states happens. If you are not optimistic, you would never get your project approved. This is part of the nature of life. But I've not personally witnessed that piling on to justify things. You obviously have, but I don't think it's widespread. So you've got two completely opposite views here. You've got one person saying optimism is one thing, but conspiring, changing things to get your project underway, that's not something that they recognise. Whereas one person saying it does happen all the time. So we've got two different views here for people who one person says they've seen it happen, one person who's very experienced, Tony Meggs, says it doesn't happen very often. What you do get is optimism. So we immediately see this sort of questioning going on. So when we think about this, when we think about any sort of outcome matrix, this is how we can look at it. We can say benefits, costs. So the best outcome, in rough terms, is where you have low costs and high benefits. That's a win-win. The probable range, costs and benefits, if they're in range, then you've done a good job at forecasting them. The worst outcome is where you have obviously high costs and low benefits. So we should be able to say, in a simple grid like that, what happened to a particular project. Another way of looking at it is like this. You can spread them out low, high, high, low, benefits and costs. And you can obviously say the on target is a good outcome, best outcomes in the top right, and the worst outcome in the bottom left. Or we could spread them like this over a set of different measures, set of different portfolios here. So the yellow ones are one set of programs, the light blue are a different one, and then the purple across the middle. So it's just a question for you all. You know, you've got 3 portfolios there. Which one performs the best? Which one do you think is the sort of best performing portfolio? The yellow ones, the blue ones, or the purple ones? What do people think? Just type in an answer, and we'll come back to it. We'll come back. Just fire an answer, and then we'll see what people think. I've got a sort of a view. Okay, just sort of fire in your, yeah. So someone said purple, someone said yellow. Who else? What else do we think? Yellow, purple, yeah. We can all agree it's not the blues, I think. So yeah, most definitely not the blues. So yeah, purple, yellow, yellow, purple. See, it's interesting this, because if it was your money and your projects, you would take the yellows because their cost is low and their benefits are high. But the challenge we've got, on average, the purple ones are kind of a sort of in range. They're in the middle. So the challenge we've got really, are we trying to get good at forecasting and planning projects, or are we just going to get lucky and hope for the best and get our yellows? So in this context, we've got two quite interesting portfolios. Let's ignore the blue ones because they're obviously bad news, bad planning, bad delivery, bad estimation in the first place. The purple ones are spread out a lot, lots of variation, lots of divergence from what should have been the sort of middle bit, which is, you know, in range. And on average, they're okay. On average, they're actually pretty, you know, quite close to the norm, but the divergence is really, really big. And that indicates a couple of things. Firstly, it indicates the fact that we weren't that good at forecasting because we've got this really broad spread. The second thing about them is that they are clearly, their divergence means that some of them turned out quite poorly. Some of them did have significantly higher costs and low benefits. You had a few wins as well. The yellow ones, well, those in many respects were just as bad at forecasting. Yeah, we had a good result in that we had low cost, high benefits, but we as project sponsors, project delivery, weren't that good at getting it right in the first place. We were lucky, but we may have significantly padded out the cost, or we might have significantly undercalled the benefits to get that pattern of results. So in answer to the question, which portfolio performs the best, blue ones we can dismiss, they were poor. The purple ones we can say, well, the divergence is too big, and the yellow ones we can say, well, we weren't very good at forecasting. So it's the yellow or the purple, but not necessarily for the same reasons. This is what we're really out after, of course. Well, we're after being able to accurately forecast, because if we can accurately forecast, so you know our cost and our benefits are bang in range. If we're able to do that and do it consistently, that means we're able to manage it. That means we're on top of our processes. We're on top of how much it's going to cost us, how long it's going to take. We understand where the benefits are accrued, So we might not have lots of wins, lots of yellow pattern stuff, but in an ideal world, all of our programs are clustered around the yellow bit. We accurately forecast. We know what we're doing in terms of delivery. We know what the benefits are going to be. We're able to forecast. That then allows our investors and our stakeholders to say, yes, this team of people, they know what they're doing. We never get the big wins, we never get the big losses, but we know what we're doing. We're able to do it properly. So Channel Tunnel and HS1. The benefits were forecast to be high with the cost low, and it ended up in that situation. So there was political doubt in the UK in particular. The French, the Belgians, etc., were very positive about high-speed rail, always have been. But in the UK, there was a lot of political doubt about it. In fact, they passed legislation saying that the UK taxpayer could not legally fund it. It had to be done independently. What's the other big risk with it? It was a one-off cost. It was a unique. Both projects were effectively unique. Very, very big rail tunnel, very long rail tunnel. And HS1, first high-speed rail in the UK and coming into parts of London with all the risks attached to that. Lots of variety, and that equals costs, and also the benefits to customers as well. And those are kind of ad hoc. You can't contract them in. You could contract some rail freight in, but you can't contract in paying passengers, of course. So a lot of those benefits were ad hoc, and they did in fact fluctuate significantly over the time that the HS1 has been operating. The rise of people like Ryanair and EasyJet have had a major impact on it, because the assumption was that people would obviously go on a railway from London to Paris or London to Belgium. But there are very cheap flights, and lots of people don't want to go into central London to catch the train in the first place. So lots of competition from flights, which wasn't really thought about at the time. So there's a very clear purpose in strategically misrepresenting the projects, both projects, Channel Tunnel and High Speed 2. So this is our best benefit cost range. So if we take offshore wind as the example, offshore wind installations around the UK are very reliable now. We are able to, I say we, people who do them are very, very good at predicting the cost. There's political alignment that it's a great idea to have offshore wind. It's an industrialized process now, so these things are built in huge factories and installed in a predictable process way, and customers are contracted for the long term. So the power takeoff is very long-term contracts. So the benefits are very easy to accurately forecast. So you don't get massive best outcome benefits or best outcome costs. What you get is lots of them in range. And from a program management point of view, that's a fantastic outcome. Because if you say it's going to cost you X tens of millions of pounds and you're going to be able to contract the power, the power takeoff from the customer, yes, it can happen. So there's no point at all in strategically misrepresenting that project, because we're very good at doing them. There's no upside in cheating the system, basically. So this is what strategic misrepresentation is intended to be about. This is the model. So you're seeking political alignment, you minimize process cost, you minimize doubt, you optimize, or you're very optimistic about demand, and the non-project benefits, which is the big criticism of HS2, is that non-project benefits, so for example, I've given there is traveling time, is now added to GDP, believe it or not, as a benefit of the project. So you push up your worst outcomes through your probable range towards your high and low, so your high benefit, low cost. But is that really what's happening? This is our question. Well, the first issue, we're going to sort of question whether or not this happens. So what are the costs and benefits on a major program? Well, there are hundreds of them and hundreds of different contributors put in estimates and ideas. So it's not necessarily a conspiracy. There isn't one person sat there with a big spreadsheet saying, you know, these are all the costs and the benefits. There are hundreds of these things go in. So it might just be that lots of people are thinking optimistically about it. So you get, you know, like we have groupthink and optimism bias, we combine the two and we end up with optimism think. Lots of people just thinking positively. Some of them will be worst outcomes, some in range, but most people will tend to say, yeah, no, do you know what? We're optimistic, we're good at what we do, we can get our costs up. So it might be that the cost benefit analysis is not actually a deliberate conspiracy. It just could be a composite of lots of optimistic people's view. So that's one way we can challenge strategic misrepresentation. Another thing is that we tend to think about benefits and costs as being kind of symmetrical, but of course they're not. So in the case of HS2, the costs will be incurred over a 20-year period, where the benefits will go on or will start to be accrued way into the distance, so way longer. And we tend to kind of think about, if it's a 20-year project, then we get our costs and benefits at the same time. Well, we need to question that as an assumption. You know, we know that the benefits are stretched out in a far, far longer period than the costs are, even though we tend to assume that they are the same. What else can we question about the assumption of strategic misrepresentation? Well, the other thing is this, that the benefits are very dependent on the contingent environment. It's really hard to attribute and isolate some of these benefits. So, for example, build a railway, build a high-speed railway to Birmingham, and you're going to stimulate employment. You probably are. Yeah, that's probably true, but that could be a long way in advance. Is housing going to improve? Are you getting investment in private housing? Yes, but who knows when? Levelling up, this sort of magical levelling up term, a long way in the future before you'd be able to say, yes, this project, HS2, levelled up the places it went to some extent. And of course, ultimately, things like social mobility, you know, that could be a long, long way in the future. That could be a 2-3 generation thing before you can demonstrate that actually happened. And there's so many other factors outside the project itself that attributing them and isolating them is really, really hard work. Very difficult to do. So what else can we think about? Well, the longer the project, the bigger the problem you've got with controlled decay and project entropy, this idea that things just break up, things just become harder and harder to control, particularly in the midterm and in the distant term. So risks and costs tend to increase with program duration. At the same time, the political commitment decreases. So today, or can decrease. So today, the UK government was elected on the promise of levelling up. Who knows about the next government, the government after that? You just don't know. The thing about risk is that it just increases over time because you're exposed to things going wrong for a much longer period. Then the final thing is just simple bad luck, and this is Fukushima. This is the power stations there. Yeah, I mean, you know, benefit of hindsight. Why was it built there? Well, it's built there like most nuclear power stations because of the water. You know, simple bad luck. One thing after another happened to that project or that program. You know, something, a tsunami happened, an earthquake, whatever. You know, the point is that the longer a program goes on for, you know, bad luck is just going to hit it. So, strategic misrepresentation, is it real? Well, possibly. But there's lots of other plausible explanations as well. Optimism think, hundreds and hundreds of inputs that individually might seem reasonable, but collectively turn out to be unlikely. Symmetry bias, this idea that the benefits and costs are delivered at the same time when we know they're not, but we think they are. Dependency on the contingent environment, so hard to isolate these things to say whether the benefit was genuinely delivered or not. And things like levelling up, etc., very hard to do. the control decay and the entropy you get with big projects, and HS2 is a 20-year project, that's likely to take place. And you never know what's going to happen with just the bad luck. Nobody was expecting COVID, but here we are. So there's lots of other explanations. So the idea of strategic misrepresentation, this thing that sits in the literature that often dominates people's thinking about major programs, particularly those that are politically motivated, we've got to really question it, whether it's true or not. So what's our conclusion? Well, my conclusion is that the idea of strategic misrepresentation is just too easy. It's too lazy an assumption. So program by program, it needs to be questioned. It's too lazy to say that always happens. It's a very easy accusation to make as well, because it's quite difficult for people to instantly defend against it, simply because the benefits, for example, just aren't accrued for a long time. It's also politically appealing. If you're an opposition party, or if you're somebody who's trying to get elected, it's very easy to point at other people's programs and projects and say, this went wrong because you didn't call it right in the first place. Another thing is, time moves on. People forget, and they don't recall, or they haven't got access to information that would allow you to demonstrate that whether the misrepresentation happened or didn't. However, practitioner narratives contradict the literature, because the literature kind of has this assumption in it. It sort of easily picks up the idea of strategic misrepresentation, but practitioner narratives very often don't back it up. And that was the point I think Tony Meggs was saying, is that we hear it talked about, but in actual fact my practice is different. I don't see that all the time, or much at all. So in conclusion, this is a fantastic opportunity. It's a fantastic topic for MMPM dissertations. And obviously, we need students to do it. We need students to do these things. Okay, has anybody got any questions about this?
We have a question from Claire. How long has offshore wind had to develop this experience?
Yeah, great question. Offshore wind in various guises has been an industry for 30 years, and it's accelerated very rapidly in the past 10 years. And I don't know if people are aware or not, but the UK has, I think, currently operating 11 out of the world's 20 largest offshore wind farms are in the UK. There's a huge one being built now, just off the coast near London, and there's some in the northwest, and they are very big and getting bigger all the time. So it does take time to do it, and it's this industrialized nature of it that allows them to be very, very good at predicting how much it's going to cost and what the benefits are going to be.
Okay. I actually have a few comments from Duncan here on the simple outcome matrix. So Duncan was saying that it depends entirely on the strategic intent of the portfolio. Sometimes you need the benefits to go to specific stakeholders, and the benefits for those stakeholders may be more expensive to deliver on a unit basis. Duncan also says portfolios aren't always maximizing PCR. Sometimes they are focused on specific disadvantaged people, which may include low PCR projects.
Really, really good point. But remember that the very outset, what the chairman said, the chairperson, is from the government. The government state what the intended benefits are. So in this case, growth, GDP growth, and levelling up. So you're right. It's really, really interesting that they pick a very obvious measure in terms of economic growth. But when it comes to explain levelling up to people, they don't really have an idea of what levelling up means. They talk about levelling up opportunities, but to what purpose? What does that actually mean?
Okay, thank you. We have a question also. It says, doesn't strategic misrepresentation impact stakeholder trust?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, and because it's such an easy accusation to make, you can get lots of people just basically accusing each other of it, and that undermines trust. And one of the big challenges with HS2 is that, you know, people instinctively don't trust anybody when they say it's going to cost X amount of money, because they just assume that they're not being entirely truthful, and so it has corroded trust very badly.
Okay. And our next question says, for a company who needs to innovate to be relevant to their customers in the face of disruption, what is the best way to avoid strategic misrepresentation? What is the best approach for cost-benefit analysis?
There's two kind of ways that people tend to do it. One is to look at external information about, or external data about something that already exists that's similar to it. And now the problem there is that if you're innovating, by definition, innovation means there isn't anything like what you're building towards. So to my mind, the only way to reliably do it is to have the right people doing it. And that means a really good, highly knowledgeable bank of people who understand the thing in its entirety. So not an economic view of it. It's got to be economic view, so financial view, plus all the other relevant stakeholders also have to have an input into it. Otherwise, you could be really lucky and innovate and do something and it works out. But across a portfolio of innovation, you're not going to get that unless you really understand it.
Okay. And our next question is from Matthew. How does project class referencing interact with strategic misrepresentation?
Reference class forecasting tends to back it up, but only on a superficial level, because reference class forecasting with major programs, major projects, particularly infrastructure ones, is not able to really understand the full benefits, because, as I was saying a couple of slides previously, they're so reliant upon so many other things. So it's very easy to say, for example, the Olympics was bad value. Well, it might have been bad value in the way it was measured, but lots of other benefits accrue that weren't in the original measurement. So the reference class itself has to be bounded by something. Unless it's unbounded, it's quite difficult to match one against the other.
Okay, thank you. And our next question is from Amal. Pandemic-induced remote working tendency will reduce the demand for HS2. How would you continue to balance the cost-benefit analysis of the project when some unexpected event like this takes place?
Well, you can't. That's one of the big problems with things like HS2, is that unless you stop the project, you know, which you know is an option. You know, so far they've spent about 15 billion with 85 billion to go. If you didn't think you're ever going to get your money back, you might as well stop it now. But once you start on these projects, cutting them back and changing specification and trying to make it cheaper can often end up costing more anyway. And there's lots of examples of where people have tried to engineer projects, major programs, whilst they go along, to adjust the balance of cost and benefit for some reason. And it's very hard to. And this is one of the problems, is when you have these sorts of analysis, there's so many factors in it that can throw you off course. It's difficult to sort of be able to adjust for them.
Okay. And one more question we have, in a program, how would you manage both maintaining legacy infrastructure while at the same time innovating?
That's a really, really broad question. Again, it's very much program by program. It's difficult to say exactly why or how, but mixing the two is never really a good idea. That can become very problematic.
Okay, so we have also a question from Paul saying, do you think that non-financial outcomes like social value are more vulnerable to optimism or perhaps strategic misrepresentation, as they are harder to measure or to scrutinize?
That is a really, really good question, because more and more we are seeking to value things. So what is the value of clean air? what is the, we understand what the benefit is, but what's the value of it? So all these sort of social values, so non-monetary but social ones, are very difficult. Noise pollution, light pollution, clean air, opportunities, all these sorts of things, very hard to value. So I don't personally subscribe to the that everything has to have a monetary value. You could just say this is better for society, and that's it. You know, that's the end of it. You don't have to give everything I don't think you have to give everything a financial value.
Okay. And we have also another question from Claire here. Are the strategic economic return on investment durations used long enough?
They don't tend to be, because I think they very often end up, people try and ban them somehow. And if we talk about levelling up, that's multi-generational. How at what point do you cease to use that in your calculation? So this is the symmetry thing. We're not really able to work out what the ongoing value of something is over a very long period of time.
Thank you. Actually, I have two more questions about suitability for the program. So I work in a political health and social care environment in the UK. We don't project costs very well, but difficult to do so in people-based services. Is this course suitable for the likes of me?
It is, because a lot of it is about stakeholder management. So in a program environment, why and how do you design organizations and deal with stakeholders and risk? So these are sort of fundamental aspects of program management and project management that are agnostic to the particular project. And in many cases, programs and projects, particularly social programs and projects, are pretty hard to manage sometimes, far more so than concrete and steel. And Monica's asked a similar sort of follow-on question. During the Masters, there's space for examples of programs that are not only about infrastructure. Yeah, absolutely, there is. And most of the cases that seem to relate to infrastructure aren't about infrastructure. They're actually to do with how people dealt with situations. And when you get to your dissertation in particular, you're able to do a very, very broad range of topics. I did this program in cohort 3, and I did my dissertation on social policy, and in particular equal pay. So nothing at all to do with infrastructure, very broad range. So I looked at the deliverability of social programs in the UK. So huge range of opportunity to come in and do different things.
Okay, thank you. Shall we take two more questions before we end the Q&A session? Okay, so we have a question from Tyler here saying, how do we introduce skin in the game for key program stakeholders going forward to de-incentivize strategic misrepresentation and shine an active light on the prevention in future delivery?
Good question. In the short term, it's quite hard to do, because if you're building a massive piece of infrastructure, each individual person who's involved in it, it's going to be negligible. So difficult to do. Obviously, over time, the program managers that are better at delivering programs consistently well over time are going to get their reward through a better career, higher day rates, higher whatever. So in the short term, very difficult. In the long term, your reputation will bring you your reward. Final question. I've already done the PMI PMP certification. Will the MS? I don't know what the PMI certification covers, but the MSc is quite academically focused. It's not a program management course directly aimed at teaching you how to deliver programs. It's an academic course which talks about the fundamentals of why and how programs go right, go wrong, and how you build out an academic evidence base for that.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks very much, Guy. I hope everyone found that very useful and informative. I will very quickly talk you through some of the deadlines coming up and admissions process. Okay. So we are currently considering applications for the September intake. To apply, candidates for the program are required to submit an online application, which includes a CV, 3 essays, 2 references, and degree transcripts showing marks per subject. If successful, candidates are invited to attend an online interview. And currently it takes our admissions team about 3 weeks to come back to you with the outcome once your application is complete. Successful applicants have a strong academic and professional background with over 7 years relevant work experience. So we have 2 scholarships for female candidates. The aim of these is to support outstanding female candidates transitioning into senior roles within their industry. Each scholarship will cover 50% of the total program fee. To apply, candidates are required to upload a supporting statement of between 400 to 500 words, part of their application for this MSc, addressing the scholarship selection criteria, which is available on our website. So if you are interested in being considered for one of these scholarships, then please submit your application by no later than Monday, 7th of June, which is about 10 days from today. Applications are considered on a rolling basis, and the next deadline is Monday, 7th of June, which is also the deadline to apply for the scholarships for women. The final deadline to be considered for this year's intake is Monday, 12th of July. Please apply early if you want to secure a place for this year, as we can accept only a limited number of students on this MSc. In terms of next steps, if you're interested in having a detailed conversation on your candidacy, please request a video meeting with myself or submit your CV for some initial feedback on your suitability. Alternatively, you can start your application online via our website. Following this webinar, we will send out the recording. These are my contact details on the screen. Please reach out if you are interested in applying for the September 2021 intake. Thank you very much to the Program Director, Guy Ainsley, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I look forward to hearing from you shortly.
Thank you, everybody.